Initially, web pages displayed in very simple fashion. You had one page per HTML. If your website had multiple pages, you would simply add another HTML file, multiple HTML files. For example, if you had a home page and an about page, you'd have a home.html and an about.html page. And you'd have an anchor tag or an A tag in your HTML that would link these two pages together. This means that if you clicked on the About link in the home page, then a request would be made out to the server to get the about.html and display it on the browser. But that was the past. And now there's multiple ways to do something like this. And in this section, we're going to talk about that. About single page applications versus server-side rendered applications. Let's go take a look at how websites used to be. Right here, we have the very first web page that was ever created by Tim Berners-Lee while he was working at CERN. If you look up at the URL bar over here, as I click on different things, a new HTML file is generated. And every time I switch links, a request is made to the browser. Let's have a look. If I go to my network tab and I click on what's out there, I get an HTML page, another HTML page. If I go back, again, another request and another request. And this was the way things worked. Life was good. Life was easy because this was the conventional method of getting your HTML up onto a screen by using server-side rendering. Server-side rendering worked great at the time too, because all we did was just render the HTML, send it to the client, which is the web browser, and the browser would create that DOM and render it on the page. And server-side rendering worked great at the time too, since most web pages back then were just displaying static images and text with very little to do with interactivity. Once I click on a link here and the request goes to the server, the request is then finished processing and your browser gets back a fully rendered HTML so that it can display it on the screen. And like you saw before, if I click on a different page, then your browser will make that same process again, make a request, the server will process that request, send back a fully rendered HTML, and then the browser will read that HTML file. And this occurs each and every time you visit a page. It doesn't even matter if one of these pages was very similar to the other, and maybe we don't need this title to be re-rendered again. It doesn't really matter. The browser will always ask for the entire page and will re-render everything on the page. So all was good back then. But wait, CSS and JavaScript came around, and people started making their websites do more things than just display text and images. CSS added styles and colors, but JavaScript came along and added a whole lot more. Since then, something called single page applications, or SPAs, have become more and more popular. Something like Product Hunt over here. These single page applications will just have one HTML file, and the rest, such as navigating between links or navigating between pages, is done inside the JavaScript, programmatically. You no longer need to go to the server to request a new page every time. Sounds pretty sweet, right? I can just play around and the page doesn't refresh, just parts of the page refresh that I need. And everything is nice and fast too. So because of this, single page applications became more and more powerful. Because you could argue that websites these days are a lot more like applications than just websites that we had back then. And this idea of a single page application or a client-side rendered application versus a server-side application was really popularized in JavaScript land by libraries like Angular 1, Backbone, and React. Because you avoided this constant request to the server to change pages and update only parts of the page that you actually need. And things looked a lot faster, as you can see here. Again, modern websites are not simple. Modern websites have hundreds of lines of code and are much more complex. Imagining how we would browse a web page and having to wait for each and every page to render when navigating a site, like we would have to with server-side rendering, would be a huge headache. By the way, this is the experience you get with older WordPress websites, where every time you click on a page, you wait staring at a blank screen for that new page to load. They have a ton of JavaScript, but it's a server-side rendered website. All right, so client-side rendering is the way of the future. Single-page applications win. Let's scrap server-side rendering forever. We're done here. Wait just a second. We should know by now that too much of anything is not good for you. You see, there are two major issues when it comes to single-page applications. One is that more JavaScript is sent to the client on the initial request because, again, we have hundreds of lines of code because JavaScript takes care of the routing and the pages and the views for us. So it takes longer for the JavaScript to get sent and then to execute. Pages become more bloated and slower to load because of this. The second issue is SEO performance, or search engine optimization. It's a lot harder to do good SEO on a single page application than a server-side rendered application. And we'll get into that. We're going to talk about all the details between what we like to call client-side rendering, which are what single-page applications are, and server-side rendered applications, with each one of them having pros and cons. In this section, we're going to be able to decide when we need to do one over the other and give Bruno the right decision for the RoboFriends product. We're also going to play with some really fun server-side rendering libraries. Time to get started. I'll see you inside.